Hello, the unspoken woman, welcome to the channel. The moment a woman stops needing to be understood by everyone, she becomes very difficult to control. And that is where the story gets interesting. Because there comes a point when a woman realizes something most people learn far too late. Being liked and being respected are not the same thing, and being misunderstood is not automatically a personal emergency. Think about it. How many times have people called someone cold simply because she stopped explaining herself? How many times has a woman been labeled difficult because she questioned something everyone else accepted? And how quickly does "she has boundaries" mysteriously become "she has an attitude"? That is the strange territory of the Sigma female. She isn't necessarily trying to become the villain. She simply reaches a stage where she refuses to keep auditioning for the role of the good woman in everybody else's story. And here's a fascinating fact. Humans are strongly influenced by social conformity. We naturally adjust our behavior based on the expectations of the groups around us. So when one person suddenly stops playing by those invisible rules, the reaction can be surprisingly intense. Because people don't always get angry when you do something wrong. Sometimes they get angry because you stopped doing what made their relationship with you comfortable. That's where things become uncomfortable. She says no without writing a 5-paragraph explanation. She walks away without announcing her departure. She forgives without giving the person another opportunity. She keeps a secret instead of exposing someone just to prove she was right. And perhaps most unsettling of all, she can hear someone say, "You're the villain," and simply think, "All right." No courtroom, no campaign, no emergency press conference. But is this strength, or can it become another form of ego? Because there is a darker side to this independence. Sometimes "I don't care what people think" is wisdom. Sometimes it's an excuse to never accept criticism. Sometimes the woman who refuses to bow to anyone has also forgotten that she should occasionally bow to the truth. And that is exactly what makes this topic worth exploring. Because the real Sigma female isn't the woman who believes she's always right. She's the woman who can survive being misunderstood without becoming dishonest with herself. So let's uncover the uncomfortable reasons some women eventually make peace with being the villain, and why the moment they stop fighting for everyone's approval, the entire game changes. Number 1. She stops defending herself against accusations that were designed to keep her explaining. A Sigma female eventually learns a frustrating truth. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Some people aren't looking for an explanation. They're looking for control over the conversation. They keep asking why she did something, why she changed, why she said no, why she became distant. And every answer creates another question. At first, she may keep explaining herself because she genuinely wants to be understood. But eventually, she notices the pattern. The more she explains, the more her words are dissected, twisted, or used against her. Suddenly, she's spending an hour defending a decision she made in 30 seconds. That's when something changes. She stops treating every misunderstanding like an emergency. If she knows she acted with integrity, she doesn't need to produce a 40-page legal brief proving her innocence. And honestly, some people would probably cross-examine the 40-page brief too. This doesn't mean she becomes incapable of accountability. If she is genuinely wrong, she can admit it. But when someone has already decided that she's guilty, endless explanations rarely change their mind. Her silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's simply the moment she realizes that peace is more valuable than winning an argument nobody entered in good faith. Number 2, she realizes that being misunderstood can be cheaper than being constantly available. A Sigma female eventually discovers that being misunderstood is not always something she needs to fix. Sometimes people have already created a version of her in their heads, and no amount of explaining will convince them otherwise. The harder she tries to correct their opinion, the more energy she gives to people who may not even deserve that access. So she starts choosing her battles. She doesn't rush to explain why she declined an invitation. She doesn't panic because someone thinks she's distant. She doesn't suddenly become available just because somebody decided her silence means she's angry. She understands that people interpret behavior through their own experiences, expectations, and insecurities. And here's the uncomfortable part. Sometimes letting someone misunderstand you is far less expensive than constantly proving yourself to them. She would rather be called arrogant than spend every day pretending to be humble just to make someone comfortable. She would rather be called antisocial than force herself into conversations she doesn't care about. She would rather be called cold than keep giving warmth to people who repeatedly take advantage of it. That doesn't mean she enjoys being misunderstood. She simply stops treating everyone's opinion as an assignment. Because eventually she realizes something liberating. Not every person who misunderstands her needs to be corrected, and not every opinion about her deserves a response. Number 3, she becomes willing to disappoint people. She has no intention of building her life around. A Sigma female eventually learns that disappointment is not the same thing as betrayal. This sounds simple, but it can completely change the way she lives. For years she may have said yes because she didn't want someone upset with her. She accepted invitations she didn't want, agreed with opinions she didn't share, and carried responsibilities that were never truly hers. Then one day she asks a much harder question. Why am I sacrificing my peace to protect the feelings of people who aren't responsible for my future? That question changes everything. She starts understanding that some people will be disappointed simply because she has limits. Someone may want more of her time. Someone may expect her to choose them over her priorities. Someone may become offended because she refuses to follow their advice. She doesn't automatically rush in to repair their disappointment. That's not cruelty. It's emotional adulthood. She can care about someone's feelings without allowing those feelings to make her decisions for her. She can say no without adding 10 apologies afterward. She can choose her priorities without turning the decision into a public debate. And yes, people may call her selfish, but she finally understands something important. If keeping everyone happy requires repeatedly abandoning herself, then someone is benefiting from her unhappiness. She would rather disappoint people honestly than impress them while quietly betraying herself. Number 4, she realizes that difficult woman is sometimes another name for woman who stopped negotiating against herself. A Sigma female eventually notices something strange. People can be perfectly comfortable with her boundaries until those boundaries inconvenience them. Then suddenly, the compliments disappear and labels begin flying. She is difficult, too stubborn, too independent, too much. But sometimes the real problem is much simpler. She stopped making deals against herself. She no longer says yes while every part of her is screaming no. She doesn't agree just to avoid tension. She doesn't laugh at disrespect because everyone else is laughing. And she doesn't keep changing her position simply because someone refuses to accept her first answer. That can be uncomfortable for people who became accustomed to her flexibility. The important difference is that she isn't difficult for entertainment. She isn't rejecting everything simply to prove she cannot be controlled. She has learned to recognize when compromise is healthy and when compromise is actually self-abandonment wearing a polite outfit. And that's where her reputation changes. The same woman who was once praised for being understanding can suddenly become hard to deal with when she develops standards. Funny how quickly patience becomes attitude when it is no longer available on demand. She doesn't need everyone to agree with her. She simply refuses to keep disagreeing with herself just to make other people comfortable. Number 5. She would rather carry the reputation of being cold than the reality of being quietly resentful. A Sigma female eventually becomes tired of being nice in ways that secretly make her miserable. She realizes that constantly swallowing her feelings doesn't make her peaceful. It simply turns today's disagreement into tomorrow's resentment. For a long time, she may tolerate little things because she doesn't want conflict. She lets someone interrupt her, dismiss her, take advantage of her time, or repeatedly cross a line. She smiles, stays quiet, and tells herself it isn't worth making an issue over. But resentment keeps receipts. Eventually, she understands that pretending everything is fine has consequences. The person crossing the boundary keeps doing it because nothing tells them to stop, while she becomes increasingly frustrated because nobody seems to notice what she has been silently carrying. So she starts speaking earlier, not louder, not crueler, earlier. She says, "I don't appreciate that." She says, "No, I'm not comfortable with this." She says, "That's not something I'm willing to do." And suddenly, the woman who tolerated everything is accused of becoming cold. She doesn't panic. If protecting her peace makes someone think she's less kind, she can live with that. She would rather have an honest disagreement than a fake smile covering genuine resentment, because there is nothing noble about being pleasant while quietly becoming bitter toward everyone around you. Sometimes the healthiest version of kindness begins with a firm, uncomfortable no. Number 6. She doesn't confuse forgiveness with reopening the door. A Sigma female eventually learns one of the hardest lessons about forgiveness. Letting go of anger does not mean handing someone another opportunity to hurt her. For a long time, people may treat forgiveness like a reset button. They apologize, she accepts it, and everyone expects things to go back to normal. But she begins to understand that forgiveness and trust are completely different currencies. She can forgive someone and still remember what happened. She can wish someone well and still refuse to have them close to her. She can release the anger without restoring the relationship. That distinction changes everything. She no longer feels guilty for keeping a door closed after someone repeatedly proved they couldn't respect what was behind it. There is no hatred required, no revenge speech, no dramatic announcement. Sometimes the relationship simply ends because the lesson has already been learned. And this is where people may misunderstand her. They might say, "If you really forgave me, you would let me back in." But she knows better. Forgiveness is about what she chooses to carry inside herself. Access is about what she chooses to allow into her life. She doesn't need to remain angry to maintain distance. In fact, sometimes the clearest sign that she has moved on is that she no longer feels the need to punish anyone. She simply doesn't give the same key to someone who already showed her what they do with it. Number 7. She stops auditioning for roles in other people's version of a good woman. A Sigma female eventually gets tired of being evaluated by rules she never agreed to follow. One person thinks a good woman should always be available. Another thinks she should never speak too directly. Someone else expects her to put everyone else's needs before her own. She starts asking a dangerous question, not dangerous because it harms anyone, but because it changes everything. Who decided this is what a good woman is supposed to look like? She realizes that approval can become a full-time job. Say the right thing, dress the right way, be agreeable enough, don't challenge anyone, don't become too successful, don't make people uncomfortable. And suddenly, she isn't living anymore. She's performing. So she steps away from the performance. She can be caring without being endlessly available. She can be feminine without being submissive. She can be ambitious without apologizing for succeeding. She can be quiet without being weak and outspoken without being disrespectful. Some people may dislike the change because the version of her they preferred was easier to predict. That's their adjustment to make. Her goal isn't to become rebellious for attention. It's to stop confusing other people's comfort with her character. Because being a good woman should not require constant self-erasure. She doesn't need to win every room she enters. She simply refuses to spend her life trying to earn a passing grade from people who keep changing the exam. Number 8, she becomes suspicious of relationships that only work when she is smaller. A Sigma female eventually notices a disturbing pattern. Some relationships only feel peaceful when she is holding herself back. When she is quiet, everything is fine. When she needs less, everyone is happy. When she avoids challenging opinions, nobody complains. But the moment she becomes more confident, more successful, more independent, or simply more honest about what she wants, the atmosphere changes. That gets her attention. She starts asking herself, does this person actually love who I am, or do they love how manageable I am? That's an uncomfortable question, because the answer can expose relationships she once considered safe. She doesn't want to constantly prove that her growth hasn't made her too much. She doesn't want to reduce her ambitions so someone else can feel important. She doesn't want to hide good news because celebrating herself might make someone uncomfortable. And she certainly doesn't want a friendship where she must remain permanently insecure to keep the friendship alive. The Sigma female doesn't necessarily announce her suspicions. She watches. Does the person celebrate her progress? Do they respect her changing priorities? Can they disagree without trying to diminish her? Can they handle her becoming stronger without treating it like a personal insult? If the relationship only survives when she is smaller, she eventually stops asking herself how to shrink. She starts asking whether the relationship deserves to survive at all. Number 9. She stops mistaking social discomfort for moral failure. A Sigma female eventually learns that an uncomfortable room doesn't automatically mean she did something wrong. This sounds obvious until she realizes how often people use discomfort as a quiet form of pressure. She says no, and someone becomes offended. She questions an unfair decision, and suddenly everyone gets tense. She refuses to laugh at a cruel joke, and the atmosphere changes. For years, she may have interpreted that tension as a warning. Maybe I should apologize. Then she learns to pause. Did I actually hurt someone, or did I simply make them uncomfortable? Those are not the same thing. Telling the truth can make people uncomfortable. Setting a boundary can make people uncomfortable. Refusing to participate in gossip can make people uncomfortable. Even succeeding beyond someone's expectations can make them uncomfortable. She doesn't automatically accept guilt just because someone isn't pleased with her behavior. But this isn't an excuse for arrogance. If she insults someone, behaves unfairly, or causes genuine harm, she owns it. Her strength isn't pretending she can never be wrong. Her strength is refusing to confuse another person's emotional reaction with proof of her wrongdoing. That distinction gives her incredible freedom. She stops rushing to repair every uncomfortable moment. Sometimes the room is tense because she crossed a line, and sometimes the room is tense because she finally stopped crossing her own. Number 10. She can leave without creating a dramatic ending. A Sigma female eventually realizes that not every ending needs an announcement. Sometimes the most honest ending is simply a quiet change in access. She doesn't always need a final argument, a long message, or a public explanation of everything that went wrong. If a relationship has repeatedly exhausted her, violated her trust, or ignored her boundaries, she may simply stop participating in it. And this can confuse people. They may expect a confrontation. They may be waiting for the famous final speech. Instead, she becomes quieter. She responds less. She stops sharing personal details. She stops making excuses for someone's behavior. Eventually, there is nothing left to maintain. Her silence isn't necessarily punishment. Sometimes she has already had the conversation in her own mind hundreds of times before anyone notices she's leaving. That's what makes her exit difficult for some people to understand. They see the final distance, but they don't see the months of disappointment that came before it. She doesn't need to convince everyone that leaving was justified. She doesn't need to gather witnesses or build a case file. Her life isn't a courtroom, and every relationship doesn't require a closing argument. Of course, quiet exits shouldn't become an excuse for avoiding necessary conversations. Mature people communicate when communication can genuinely repair something. But when the decision is final, she doesn't always need to create a spectacular ending. Sometimes she simply walks away and lets the silence explain what words no longer need to. Number 11. She understands that being feared and being respected are completely different things. A Sigma female eventually learns that intimidation is a cheap substitute for respect. Making people nervous around her might give her temporary control, but it doesn't create genuine regard. She isn't interested in becoming the woman everyone is afraid to challenge. She wants to become the woman whose boundaries people understand. That's a completely different kind of strength. She doesn't need to raise her voice whenever someone crosses a line. She doesn't need threats, dramatic warnings, or a carefully maintained "don't mess with me" personality. Her consistency does the talking. If she says she won't tolerate disrespect, she means it. If someone repeatedly breaks her trust, she changes the relationship. If she says no, she doesn't eventually say yes because someone complained loudly enough. That predictability creates respect. And here's the interesting part. She doesn't demand respect while disrespecting everyone else. She knows that having boundaries doesn't give her permission to humiliate people, manipulate them, or treat disagreement as rebellion. She can be firm without being cruel. She can be powerful without performing power. She can walk away without making someone afraid of her. This is where her independence becomes mature. She isn't trying to dominate the room. She simply refuses to surrender herself to control it. Because fear says, "Don't challenge me." Respect says, "You know exactly where I stand." And she prefers the second one because it doesn't require a performance. Number 12. She doesn't need revenge. Because becoming unavailable is sometimes the consequence. A Sigma female eventually discovers that revenge can keep her emotionally attached to the very person she claims to have moved beyond. She may think she is punishing someone, but if she is still checking their reactions, watching their life, or planning ways to make them regret losing her, they still occupy space in her mind. So, she chooses something quieter. Withdrawal. She removes access to what she once gave freely: her attention, trust, time, emotional support, private conversations, and endless patience. Not because she wants to hurt someone, but because she has finally understood that access to her is not a permanent entitlement. This can be more powerful than revenge because there is no performance attached to it. She doesn't need to post indirect messages. She doesn't need mutual friends to hear her side. She doesn't need to make someone's life miserable just because they made hers difficult. She simply stops participating, and that can be surprisingly uncomfortable for the other person. They may have expected anger, arguments, or some dramatic reaction. Instead, they discover that the relationship has become ordinary silence. But she must be honest with herself too. If her unavailability is secretly designed to make someone chase her, it isn't really detachment. True detachment doesn't ask, "Did they notice I left?" It asks, "Why would I stay where I am no longer valued?" Once she genuinely answers that question, revenge becomes unnecessary. At the end of the day, making peace with being the villain isn't about becoming cold, arrogant, or impossible to challenge. It is about reaching a point where other people's opinions no longer control your identity. The Sigma female learns that she doesn't have to explain every decision, repair every uncomfortable moment, reopen every closed door, or make herself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. She learns that forgiveness doesn't require access, boundaries don't require cruelty, and leaving doesn't always require a dramatic goodbye. Most importantly, she learns to question herself too, because real independence isn't saying everyone else is wrong. It's having enough self-awareness to say, I might be wrong, but I will not pretend I'm wrong simply because you dislike my decision. That is the difference between rebellion and self-respect. She doesn't walk through life trying to prove she's the strongest woman in the room. She doesn't need to be feared. She doesn't need everyone cheering for her. And she certainly doesn't need to win every argument. Sometimes she will be misunderstood. Sometimes people will call her difficult. Sometimes someone will turn her boundaries into a story about her character. And she learns to let them. Because when you stop needing everyone to approve of your choices, you become responsible for something far more important, the life those choices create. So if you've ever been called cold for protecting your peace, difficult for having standards, or selfish for finally choosing yourself, remember this. Being disliked doesn't automatically mean you're wrong. But being independent also doesn't make you automatically right. Keep your boundaries. Keep your humility. Keep questioning yourself. And never surrender your character simply to remain popular. If this perspective gave you something to think about, subscribe to the channel for more conversations that challenge the way you see people, personality, strength, and human behavior. And remember, you don't have to be everyone's hero. You just have to be honest about the person you're becoming.